Yeah. Okay, everyone, we're really about to get started now. There, live stream is showing the transition. This is great. And I'm going to share my screen, and that way everything should start working out. Okay, this screen indeed. Share that, and boom. Okay. And yeah, it looks like the live stream is catching up. So far, everything is working nicely. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first workshop of the year. We're trying something pretty new here, a hybrid workshop, meaning that most of you are online and only some of us are on location in San Francisco. And, oh, I don't know why I'm suddenly getting a lot of Slack messages here. Wish that wasn't popping up. Anyway, so there may be a few snags here and there as we try to figure out how this works best. It seemed like a really good way to make a workshop available for free to everyone, get as many people to join in as possible, not have any difficulties with speakers having to travel at last minute or anything like that. Although some speakers are nice enough to have come and joined us here in San Francisco. I'll introduce some of the speakers in just a moment. Okay, so I see that our group is slacking a bunch of stuff. I'm glad to see it hasn't popped up on the live stream so far. All right, so first of all, as we're here, I'd like to, oh, now they're popping up, okay. I guess it's always just a little delayed. I'd like to thank our sponsors, first of all. They really helped out at the last minute to make this workshop possible. I'd like to thank 3Scan very much for offering us the space here in San Francisco. Oh, it looks like I have to mute something here. Why am I getting a feedback? Oh, I see. Somebody on the Google Hangouts probably has feedback.
That was me. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, if everyone who is on the Google Hangouts and who is not speaking could mute themselves, that would help a lot. Thank you. Okay. So anyways, thanks to 3Scan for offering to use their space and helping out with the setup and everything else. I'd also like to thank the 2045 Social Strategic Initiative, or Strategic Social Initiative, which helped us with some of the funding for the event, as well as Fathom Computing, that has likewise helped us out financially. And just, they wanted me to quickly say what Fathom Computing is, so I will. Fathom Computing is building an optical computer for deep learning. And their processors use the wave nature of light to do computation, communication, and architecture suited for artificial neural networks with unprecedented speed and performance. Fathom's goal is to scale AI to human levels and beyond. They're hiring talent at fathomcomputing.com/careers. So this is Fathom Computing, and thanks for their contribution. And then also Scott Jackish of oaklandfuturist.com. Thank you very much to all of our sponsors. My name is Randal Koene. I'm the founder and chairman of the nonprofit Carboncopies. So for our remote participants, I'd just like to mention that whenever you have a few minutes, say after the workshop, during the break, or whenever, please take a moment to participate in our survey. We'd like to understand more about your interests and how we can take those into consideration in our activities. The URL for that is really simple. It's carboncopies.org/survey. And I should mention that we have, say, what is it now? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 10 people locally at the moment. I know that there are more people who will be showing up here, so we'll have about 20 locally. But online, judging by RSVPs, we have something between, on the order of 150 to 200 people who'll be watching, probably not the whole time, since people can just log in and see sessions they're interested in and disappear whenever they want to. But it's a really nice turnout. Okay. So, yeah, let's see. I hope this all works out. Please bear with us whenever things are a little bit weird. We're going to have to be unusually careful for a workshop about giving the floor to people rather than interrupting, because of this this issue of getting what people are saying, their questions and their answers, to live stream as well. But I'll try to make sure that that all works out okay. In any case, let's not worry about that. You know, worst case scenario, we have a good series of talks. And best case scenario, we've got some productive discussion as well. Most importantly, let's try to have fun. Okay, I'd like to mention to those of you who are from the group, I'm sure that once we're an hour into this, it'll all be figured out. Okay, so most people who are joining today have probably already heard of either mind uploading or whole brain emulation in one way or another. I'm just going to say a few words about why we at Carboncopies have made it our mission to push for its development and accomplishment, and why we think it's important to humanity or human society as a whole. I'm leaving all the really cool presentation making up to the other speakers, because given all the time that went into preparing the workshop, I didn't get to prepare a really great presentation of my own. But I'm going to try to be a little bit more specific about what the idea here is, and the goal and the challenges. And in, oh gosh, so it didn't manage to turn off my Slack after all, it seems. I don't understand why not. So many issues. Okay. So in a world where physics, biology, chemistry, currency, and even intelligence are becoming code, I guess one of the statements that I'm making is that our species can flourish only if we also come to grips with ourselves as information processes of a sort. So the purpose of this introductory talk is to introduce concepts and to provide the context for the remaining sessions and speakers in the workshop. Let me say up front that it's not going to be a fantastic presentation, but I hope that you all get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And see if everything works out nicely from here on. Oop, just jumped ahead a bit. Okay. If we're going to talk about mind uploading and whole brain emulation, it's important that we understand what we all mean by that we have some common terminology. So here I've tried to show this on a slide in some sense, to use an analogy. We begin with what I would call the experiential perspective, or human experience, to that which a person or a human being experiences. We could say that it's an abstraction level of sorts. What it does include, for example, are cognitive faculties such as sensation and perception, learning and memory, goals and desires, and awareness, and several others, of course. Without those, it's really hard to imagine a human mental life. But what the experiential perspective doesn't include, for example, are interactions of atoms and ions in the chemistry of cells, metabolic processes, molecular signaling processes. And I know that last one is potentially going to sound a bit controversial to the neuroscientists listening to this. What I'm trying to say is, at this moment, I really have no idea which synapse in my brain was involved with what I was thinking, or which receptor channels were being activated, or which ones tried to activate but failed. All of these little details about the underlying biology are not part of my experiential cognitive existence. Of course, that doesn't mean that those things don't matter at all, and the cutoff is definitely far from absolute. What it does mean is that we need to recognize that depending on our goals, different abstraction levels may require particular attention. So for example, if you're trying to cure Alzheimer's disease, then it's probably really important to pay close attention to molecular processes. But if you're trying to build an intelligent machine or a device that replaces the information processing carried out in a small part of the brain, then it's really the effect on the cognitive experience that matters most directly. And this is where I put up the analogy. Imagine, for example, that you want to run an internet browser on a computer. You don't want to have to care about the precise layout of every transistor involved in that process. Otherwise, for example, it would be impossible to design and upgrade to new CPUs. All you want to do is you want to make sure that every CPU is able to run the same program code and produce a satisfactory user experience. So there is an abstraction level that's important. In this way, we could say that the path to a successful mind upload begins with identifying your success criteria. For many of us, that means at a minimum, retaining what our conscious day-to-day experience is presently like, and then aiming to upgrade to an ever better performance. Now, the term emulation or emulator has been used to describe this separation of scales, being able to abstract away the details below the level of interest and still ending up with the desired result. In the example of the internet browser, as long as the program code runs properly, everything below that can be accomplished in a variety of ways. In fact, in that example, it might be sufficient just to ensure that the browser interprets HTML code at websites correctly, allowing even the underlying software to be rewritten from version to version. Similarly, in a computer system, if a computer system can run an emulator to permit using programs that were designed to be run on a different or older computer system. Now, our cognitive processes are normally run by the human brain. Our default hypothesis is that everything about our mind that is relevant to the human experience is an emergent result of the processes taking place in the brain. And to date, that's a hypothesis that has passed every test with flying colors. We see that lesions in the brain directly correspond to changes in cognitive behavior, and we haven't yet found anything that that would indicate something lying beyond this brain processing for human cognition. So if we can run cognitive processes by emulation on another platform, then that ultimately results in what we're calling whole brain emulation. We sometimes then call that substrate independence because a brain emulator could be implemented in many different ways, no longer necessarily depending on biology. Now, in neural engineering today, the effort to build neural prosthesis is the earliest attempt to achieve something that is closely related to brain emulation. A neural prosthesis is meant to replace or support the cognitive function that's carried out by some set of neural circuits in specific regions of the brain. The prosthesis is built by creating computational models of the processing carried out by those neural circuits, and those models are then run on a computer or embedded in some device that interfaces and communicates with healthy neural tissue in a patient. The more accurate the model that was built using brain data, the better the implementation can be. The principal operators in the brain are called neurons, tiny simple processors that only experience an increase or decrease in their membrane potential, and at some threshold they respond with an electric discharge. And ultimately, it's the orchestration of billions of neurons that is the information processor that plays the symphony that's our experience of being. You can imagine that progressive neural prosthesis for every piece of the brain is ultimately identical to whole brain emulation. Now, it's pretty easy to see why individual neural prostheses are useful and desirable. At a minimum, they help with a brain dysfunction, for example. And beyond that, they hold the promise of augmented capability. It's also pretty easy to see why mapping and modeling brain functions is important to science, medicine, and the development of analogous functions in AI. But why does Carboncopies specifically promote attention to and advances towards whole brain emulation? The biological brain isn't optimized for access or monitoring, and it's not optimized for modification or augmentation. Once neural prosthesis reaches the point where you can emulate the whole brain, you reach a very special milestone. As long as part or all of cognition rely on the biological brain, there are hard limits to the sort of cognitive function that's possible. I'm trying to show that here in this simple graph where, say, the range of things that people can do and experience is a fixed amount of stuff. There's I don't know, is there a way to actually get a pointer on the screen here? I think there is. Okay. Oh yeah, here. So this, it's going to show up a little late on the live stream, but I'm pointing at that part where it says now. There's a limited range of what we can do and what we can experience. Then if you have neural prostheses, then you can do a bit more because you could tie in augmentation that is carried out on a device and tie it into the rest of the brain. But of course, as long as there is still a part of that cognition that relies on the biological brain, well, you're still going to have to deal with those limits. So for example, the limitations of neural responses mean that it's impossible to cognitively be aware of or respond to events at a microsecond scale, something that machines are capable of doing. So this is the human thriving argument for whole brain emulation and the understanding that comes with it, to expand the range of possible human experiences and capabilities instead of submitting to the narrowly constrained way in which we can experience the universe today and ceding the bigger picture to machines. There's also the important survival argument, though. Without being able to actually modify our mental abilities, we're constrained to what I might call an evolutionary niche of sorts. And the history of evolutionary change demonstrates that it's very likely that this niche may disappear and that humans may soon play an increasingly minor role in the future society of intelligence. Adapting to such change may very well be a survival requirement. So the main reasons we have are both thriving and survival, this ability to move beyond the limits of what the biology gives us. Now, since Carboncopies was founded back in 2010, and even a couple of years before that, we've been keeping track of the biggest challenges and possible routes to solutions. It began with the 2008 roadmap that came out of the Whole Brain Emulation Workshop at Oxford. The purpose of this road mapping is to determine how to map the structure of the brain, how to record the response characteristics of its neurons and synapses, how to build a working model with parameters defined by those data maps, and then how to bring to life all of that in a real implementation of the whole brain emulation. So what are the biggest challenges today that need to be overcome for neural prosthesis and ultimately whole brain emulation to be possible? The greatest challenge is undoubtedly still the problem of acquiring sufficient data from an animal or human brain. To build a prosthesis, you need to be able to adequately approximate how a specific set of neural circuitry transforms incoming signals into outgoing signals. That process of approximation is called system identification. It's a systematic process of developing a computational model of the transformation from brain data. The more we know about the structure of the circuits in the neural tissue, the better we can constrain the possible models, reducing the search space and easing the computational burden for system identification. Today, developments in the area of connectomics seek to give us access to both the general and patient-specific neural circuit structure. 4 of our speakers are going to be addressing particular approaches to that problem, or to, especially the connectomics problem. Ken Hayworth, Sean Mikula, Tony Zador, and Adam Marblestone. Knowing structure alone, though, is not enough to build a working emulation. After all, the 3D connectome image is certainly not a working emulation. More inference is needed to convert a structural diagram into a working model in which the specific response functions of the components were correctly selected from a range of possibilities. We do not have these libraries of possible response functions and ways to select them and their parameter values. Today, functional recording with implanted electrodes is the most feasible way to collect data about the actual response of the system. And statistical regression or machine learning can then be used to build models and fit parameters, constrained by what we know about the circuit structure. It's this method of functional recording, followed by models building upon the known circuit structure of the CA3-CA1 transition in hippocampus, that the Berger Lab at USC and its associates and collaborators use in their neuroprosthetic efforts. Professor Theodor Berger will present state-of-the-art in this effort in the final talk of the roadmap session. Okay. We're almost through my presentation here now. In addition to identifying, tracking, mapping, and seeking solutions for scientific and technical challenges, Carboncopies also tries to draw attention to opportunity challenges. What I mean is, there are problems around creating projects, collaborations, or organizations in which researchers can take on the challenges. Most of these projects and collaborations still depend entirely on academic groups, but there is no limit to the variety of organized approaches that we consider, explore, and support. In the past few years, there was opportunity to explore how private startup enterprise could enter the mix. Incentives and obligations in the for-profit structure are different than those in academic settings, leading to a different set of advantages and disadvantages. It makes sense that there are types of projects on the roadmap to whole brain emulation that are well suited to development in a startup, and other types better suited to development in academia. A couple of high-profile efforts along these lines have had a little over a year to gain traction at this point. Kernel and Neuralink are the ones we mentioned in our schedule. Their founders declare that their companies exist to create bridges between human and machine, even to achieve neuroprosthesis to lift up humanity. What do these companies contribute that is difficult or impossible in academia? And what may still be beyond their reach? On a panel in topic B of the workshop, I will discuss with Dr. Diana Deca some of the nuances of this new development and generally how startup efforts fit into the big picture. Okay, so that's for that bit. And sorry, when I just paused for a brief moment, my computer was telling me that I would have to restart Windows soon for an update. I don't think that's something I want to do right now. It's lovely to see these things happen all the time. Okay, so this year, our team of Carboncopies researchers is launching a technological review project. This is because a living and useful roadmap needs ongoing renewal, and the tech review is going to be a major input to that. 5 members of the team will be introducing the project at this workshop by discussing their problem statements for the first subset of domains that the tech review will cover. Now, what they're going to be talking about is what are the problems in each of these review topics that they'll focus on. How do they select the science and technology to study based on the potential to solve a particular problem? The project is going to invite peer review and will publish its results as part of the foundational literature on the science and technology of whole brain emulation. Abul Fazl Alipour, one of our researchers, will introduce the review for the question, what are the hardware requirements for useful performance of neuroprosthesis or brain emulation? Ilya Sapranidi will introduce the review for the question, what are the different pieces of neurotechnology that are involved in the process of neuroprosthesis and brain emulation? Although, as it turns out, Ilya is actually very ill, and so I'll be presenting on his behalf. So the question there is, for example, how can you best collect functional brain data at a high spatial and temporal resolution in a living animal or patient? Then we have a researcher of ours who only wants to be identified as John Doe, he prefers anonymity, who's going to introduce the review for the question, what types of brain mapping are needed for neuroprosthesis or brain emulation? So for instance, what's the right resolution for a useful connectome? And does that require electron microscopy or optical microscopy, possibly enhanced by expansion microscopy? Oh, I'm wondering why the live stream just popped away. Javon, I don't think it's focusing on me anymore, on the thing that, on my, my screen share. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yep, back up to that. And then Bill Crowan, I don't exactly know how to pronounce your name. Is that right? Krogan. How do you say it?
Bill Krogan.
Krogan. Yeah. Bill Krogan is going to introduce the review for the question, what sort of computation brain models are relevant for neuroprosthesis and brain emulation? For example, what describes the dynamic characteristics of components in a connectome? And Alicia Smallwood, our research director, is going to introduce the review for the question, what are the fundamental theoretical requirements upon which the possibility of whole brain emulation actually rests? Okay, we're seriously almost done with my presentation, I promise. We want to use this workshop as an opportunity to highlight and empathize a challenge that's received surprisingly little attention so far. When applications of neurotechnology are discussed in general, when we talk about neural interfaces and prosthesis, and even brain emulation, access to brain data is such an urgent problem at the front of the queue that questions about how to interpret and use that data are often set aside for later. And yet, getting from a pile of data to a working prosthesis or brain emulation is non-trivial. Indeed, it's an entire research domain in its own right. So how do you approximate brain function from brain data? How do you do it so well that the result satisfies the criteria for a successful emulation? This is why we picked the special topic, Discovering Neural Circuits in Brain Data. And Diana Deca and Mikhail Lebedev will give talks in this particular part of the workshop, and each of their talks takes on an approach or a perspective on the problem. There are many more perspectives on that particular problem, and it'll take a lot more than a small part of a workshop to deal with this. We're just introducing it at this point. But this year, Carboncopies intends to shine a light on that particular challenge through a succession of efforts. Possibly the most ambitious of those efforts is to prepare a 24-month research project where we hope to use both functional recording and simulation to describe what we predict and what we cannot predict about data acquisition and data processing requirements. Yeah, this is a very complicated slide that I just added in for this, and I was hoping to get into details of that, but I'll do that at a different opportunity, I think, and just leave it for now. So I'm going to just switch to the last slide here. Let's wait for it to pop up on the live stream. Just to give a quick overview of something that I think is a, come on, there we go, is a reasonable, say, temporal ordering of what may happen in the years to come. Because, you know, whole brain emulation depends on a lot of things. Even neural prosthesis depends on many, many things. And so these dependencies and the opportunities, they lead to a kind of temporal order that makes sense. And what I'm trying to show here is that we might, for instance, imagine that we're going to get some kind of application that is either for patients or even for normal users that involves non-invasive recording as a neural interface, and that can give you brain diagnostics or something else. And stimulation interfaces, of course, are going to be used in some form or another. Perhaps we'll start wearing sensors and various interfaces a lot of the time. Then, at some point, neuroprosthetic medical devices are going to start popping up in patients. And you could say, if you look at the lower end there, where it says 2036 to 2042, that patients who receive these implants, these devices, may end up being the first people with some kind of superpower. Let's say, for example, that you have a retinal implant, and the retinal implant is tuned to allow you to see X-rays. Well, this is a kind of superpower. Or let's say that you have an implant that replaces a piece of the hippocampus, which is what Ted is hopefully going to talk about. Then perhaps you can in some way categorize what is happening over time in that implant, and you can choose which memories you want to strengthen and which ones you don't want to strengthen, or which ones you want to help recall more easily. And that way you have a way of selecting among your new memories that you're forming in a way that we currently don't have. And that itself would be a kind of superpower, even if perhaps the quality of those first prostheses in patients won't be perfect. You know, even if perhaps they don't work quite as well as a biological hippocampus does, they may still have the ability to do certain things that we currently can't. Then eventually, hopefully, you'll see neural prostheses in many regions of the brain. And at some point, you could say that leads to whole brain emulation, either directly through this multiple neural prostheses approach or a parallel approach where we learn how to replicate brains by knowing more about how the structure can be, how the function can be inferred from the structure. So this is sort of an outline of a possible future. Okay, now I have to try the next part of it.